The sun hung low in the winter sky, casting a pale golden glow over the endless expanse of snow-draped wilderness. Frost clung to the towering pines, their heavy branches bowing under the weight of ice, while the distant mountains loomed, their jagged peaks lost in a haze of mist. The air was sharp, biting with the kind of cold that seeped into bones, unforgiving and relentless. Ranger Daniel Hayes adjusted his thick coat, the crunch of snow beneath his boots the only sound in the stillness. He had spent years patrolling these remote forests, documenting wildlife activity and ensuring the fragile ecosystem remained undisturbed. Today seemed like any other, until it wasn't. His breath plumed in the freezing air as he raised his binoculars, scanning the treeline. Tracks crisscrossed the snow, some from deer, others from smaller creatures, but nothing seemed amiss. The forest was alive in its quiet way, the silence punctuated by the occasional distant call of a raven. Yet, there was something about this morning, an unease he couldn't quite place. Then, movement. A disturbance near the frozen riverbank. Daniel's pulse quickened. Something was there. Something struggling. Daniel took careful steps toward the disturbance, his boots sinking slightly into the snow. The wind carried a faint, distressed sound, low, guttural, almost like a growl, but weaker. He tightened his grip on his binoculars and focused on the edge of the frozen river. There, half buried in the snow and ice, lay a lynx. At first, Daniel thought it was dead. Its fur, once thick and regal, was patchy and matted with ice. Its body was unnaturally still, ribs barely rising with shallow breaths. But then, a flicker, one of its ears twitched. The lynx was alive, but just barely. His eyes quickly scanned the animal for injuries. That's when he noticed the grotesque patches of barnacles clinging to its legs and hindquarters, something he had never seen before on a wild cat. Thick, parasite-ridden fur was caked with frozen mud, and parts of its skin looked raw and inflamed. This wasn't just an injured animal, this was something far worse. Daniel crouched slowly, his voice calm. "Easy there, buddy." The lynx lifted its head weakly, its golden eyes locking onto his for a fleeting moment before its body sagged against the ice. His instincts kicked in. He grabbed his radio, voice firm despite the rush of adrenaline. "I've found a lynx in critical condition. It's covered in barnacles and parasites. I need backup. Now." As he waited for a response, he glanced at the frozen river, then back at the lynx. Whatever had happened to this creature, it had endured something unnatural, something that shouldn't have been possible. Daniel knelt beside the lynx, his breath fogging in the frigid air. Up close, the extent of the animal's suffering became even clearer. The barnacles were not just clinging to its fur, they had burrowed into its skin, forming hardened clusters along its legs and hindquarters. Dark, crusted wounds surrounded the incrustations, signs of infection creeping beneath the surface. Worse still, parasites wriggled in the raw patches, thriving in the weakened flesh. Daniel had never seen anything like it. Barnacles on a marine animal? Sure. But on a lynx? It defied logic. The lynx let out a weak, rasping breath, its body trembling violently against the snow. It tried to move, one paw scraping feebly against the ice, but it lacked the strength. Daniel's heart tightened. The animal was on the brink of collapse. "Hang in there, buddy," he murmured, carefully sliding off his thick ranger's jacket. As he draped the coat over the lynx, shielding it from the cutting wind, his radio crackled to life. "Daniel, this is dispatch. Backup is en route. ETA 15 minutes. Can you stabilize it?" He pressed the button. "It's in bad shape, malnourished, dehydrated, and infected." And he hesitated, staring at the barnacle-covered fur. Something's not right. This isn't a normal injury. Static. Then, understood. Keep it calm. Help is coming. Daniel's mind raced. How had this happened? Had the lynx fallen into the river? Been trapped in a body of water long enough for marine parasites to latch on? If so, how had it survived? He studied the ice around them. There were no cracks, No sign of a struggle. And yet, something about the frozen river felt off. His gut told him this lynx hadn't just wandered into danger, it had endured something no wildcat was meant to survive. Then, a sound, a soft, pitiful whimper. Daniel turned sharply. Just beyond the tree line, a smaller shape emerged, a second lynx, barely more than a cub. It was thinner than it should have been, its fur patchy but free of barnacles. Unlike the injured adult, this one still had its strength. It hovered uncertainly, wide golden eyes locked onto Daniel and the motionless lynx at his feet. His stomach sank. A mother and her cub. The younger lynx let out another weak cry, taking a hesitant step forward before retreating, torn between fear and instinct. Daniel clenched his jaw. This wasn't just a rescue, this was a fight for survival. The mother was dying, and the cub had no idea what to do. He had to act fast. With his pulse hammering, Daniel pressed his radio again. Change of plans. There's a cub. The mother's barely holding on, and the little one won't leave her. We need a transport crate, maybe two. Copy that, came the swift reply. Daniel exhaled, turning his focus back to the mother lynx. Help is coming, he murmured, more to himself than to her. But deep down, he knew time was running out. Daniel knelt beside the lynx, his breath forming ghostly clouds in the frigid air. The closer he looked, the worse it got. The barnacles weren't just clinging to the animal's fur, they had fused with its skin, grotesque clusters embedded deep in the raw, inflamed flesh. Parasites squirmed in the open wounds, feasting on the infected tissue. The stench of decay, subtle but unmistakable, made his stomach turn. The lynx shivered violently, its breath coming in short, ragged gasps. A low, pitiful whimper escaped its throat, a sound of exhaustion, pain, and something else. Resignation. Daniel's jaw tightened. He had seen injured wildlife before, frostbitten moose, wolves caught in snares, even a bear with a broken leg, but nothing like this. Nothing so unnatural. Barnacles belonged in the sea, not on a mountain predator. He eased off his heavy ranger's jacket and draped it over the lynx's fragile body. The animal barely reacted. His radio crackled. Daniel, backup is en route. ETA 15 minutes. Status? He pressed the button. Bad. Severe malnourishment, infected wounds, possible hypothermia. He hesitated. And something else. Barnacle growth all over its hindquarters. Silence. Then, repeat that? You heard me. He scanned the area. No signs of how it got here. No cracks in the ice, no drag marks. Just collapsed in the snow. The response was slower this time. Understood. Keep it stable. We're moving as fast as we can. Daniel exhaled sharply. Keep it stable. As if he had any real control over that. A sharp sound broke the stillness, a soft, trembling whimper. He turned, hard hammering. Just beyond the tree line, half hidden among the frost-laden pines, stood a smaller figure. Another lynx. This one was young, barely more than a cub. Its golden eyes flicked between Daniel and the injured adult, fear and desperation warring in its expression. Its ribs were visible beneath its patchy fur, its body thin from hunger. Daniel swallowed hard. A mother and her cub. The young lynx took a hesitant step forward, then faltered. Its ears flattened, and it let out another weak cry, pleading, uncertain. Daniel clenched his fists. The mother was dying. And the cub had no idea what to do. Instinct screamed at him, if the mother succumbed, the cub wouldn't last long. He pressed his radio again, voice tight. We have a cub. Repeat, a cub is here, and it's not leaving its mother. Copy that. We'll bring an extra transport crate. Daniel glanced at the mother lynx. Her breathing was shallow, her once powerful frame reduced to a trembling heap beneath his coat. Time was slipping away. He had to keep her alive. For her. For the cub. and for the answers buried beneath those impossible barnacles. This content may violate our usage policies. Did we get it wrong? Please tell us by giving this response a thumbs down. Daniel's heart pounded as he worked swiftly, his breath sharp in the freezing air. The lynx's shallow breathing was growing fainter, and he knew time was running out. Frost had begun to cling to her whiskers, her body barely responding to the touch of his gloved hands. The cub, standing just a few feet away, let out another desperate whimper. The sound sliced through the stillness like a knife, raw and urgent. It paced in the snow, torn between fear and the instinct to be close to its mother. Then, headlights. A snowmobile roared into view, spraying powder as it skidded to a halt. Two rescue team members leaped off, carrying medical kits and a transport crate. "How bad?" one of them, a woman named Riley, shouted over the wind. "Critical," Daniel responded, already unzipping his pack for supplies. "Severe hypothermia. Multiple wounds. Barnacles fused into the skin." The other rescuer, Mark, swore under his breath. "Barnacles?" He dropped to his knees, inspecting the lynx. "That's impossible." "No time to question it now," Daniel snapped. "We need to stabilize her." Riley was already working, slipping a thermal blanket beneath the lynx. "We need to get her warmed up and on fluids ASAP." She checked the animal's gums, frowning. "Her circulation is weak. If we don't move now, she won't make it." The cub let out another cry, pacing anxiously. "We have to bring them both," Daniel said. "She won't go without the cub." Riley hesitated. "We don't have room for an uncontained wild cub." "I'll carry it," Daniel interrupted. "It's weak, and it's not going to run." There was no time for debate. Mark hoisted the mother lynx carefully into the transport crate, securing her with a blanket. She barely moved, only a faint flicker of her golden eyes indicating she was still with them. Daniel turned to the cub, lowering his voice. "Come on, little one. We're going to help her." Slowly, he reached out. The cub hesitated, trembling. Then, in a moment of trust born from desperation, it stepped toward him. Gently, Daniel scooped the cub into his arms and climbed onto the snowmobile. "Go!" he shouted. The engine revved, and they sped off into the storm, racing against time to save a life. Equals 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 equals. The rescue team burst through the doors of the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, their breaths heavy, their gear dusted with frost. The mother lynx was rushed into emergency care, while Daniel carefully set the cub down in a smaller enclosure beside her. The little one pressed against the glass divider, watching its mother with wide, unblinking eyes. The next few hours were agonizing. The veterinary team worked tirelessly, removing the embedded barnacles one by one, cleaning deep lacerations where fishing line had cut into her flesh, and administering fluids to counteract dehydration. Her body was weak, teetering on the edge. Daniel paced outside the observation room, unable to tear his eyes away. The cub whimpered softly, scratching at the divider, yearning to be near its mother. "She's stable," Riley finally announced, exhaustion in her voice. "But it's going to be a long recovery." Daniel exhaled, feeling the weight in his chest lighten just a little. He stepped closer to the cub's enclosure and crouched down. "She made it," he murmured, voice thick with emotion. "You saved her." The cub, as if understanding, blinked up at him, then turned to its mother, still weak but breathing. For the first time since the ordeal began, hope felt real. Weeks passed, and the mother lynx's strength slowly returned. Her fur began to fill in where the barnacles had once left marks, and the cub, now growing bolder, stayed close, always vigilant. The bond between them was undeniable, an unspoken promise that, no matter what, they would face the world together. One crisp morning, the rehab center staff prepared for their release. Daniel stood beside the transport truck, watching as the mother and cub were carefully loaded into the crate. The moment had arrived. "This is it," Riley said, her voice quiet but resolute. "They'll be fine now." Daniel nodded, but the sense of finality in the air was heavy. They drove to a remote area deep in the forest, an isolated stretch of land that felt as much like home to the lynx as it did to him. As the crate door opened, the mother lynx stepped out first, her body now fluid and strong. She paused, taking in her surroundings. The cub followed hesitantly, its small paws scuffing the snow. They lingered at the edge of the trees, turning back to look at Daniel, who stood motionless, his heart full. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The mother lynx's golden eyes locked onto his, a silent acknowledgement of everything that had passed between them, of the bond forged in survival and trust. And then, with a flick of her tail, she disappeared into the wilderness, the cub bounding after her. Months later, during a routine patrol, Daniel spotted movement by the same stretch of trees. There they were, mother and cub, their silhouettes framed against the early morning light. The lynx paused, their eyes meeting his once more, before slipping back into the depths of the forest, as fleeting and beautiful as the bond they'd shared. Daniel stood still, a sense of peace settling over him. Sometimes, the wild didn't just survive, it thrived.